Hello, and welcome to Movies We Dig, the podcast about film, antiquity, and everything in between. I'm Colin McCormick.
I'm Elijah Fleming.
And I'm Christy Vogler.
And today we're talking about Thermae, Romae, Novae, a 2022 anime based on the manga series Thermae Romae by Mary Yamazaki. We also today have a very special guest returning to talk about yet another animated feature. We're joined by Chiara Sulprizio, senior lecturer at Vanderbilt University and creator of the web archive Animated Antiquity. Welcome, Chiara. It's great to have you back on the show.
Yay! Thank you. I'm so happy to be back and excited to be, talking about anime with you all again.
And this is a long awaited, because we've known we wanted to do things in this universe basically since we first learned about this manga, and there's a live action movie and there's a sort of shorter anime. But then when the most recent anime came out, we were like, we have to get Chiara back on. And then so we like put it we had it sort of in the lineup for like almost a year now, I think.
I know. Yeah. I don't know. I went off into some cave or something, but I've emerged and I'm excited to talk about this. So yeah, I think it's been good to let it simmer, I think, too, a little bit. This one.
Yeah, well, you got to soak, right? It's got to soak. It's got to let the detritus come off, right? You got to get the fully.
Preferably you're soaking in the wine bath, because like
I don't know how I feel about that one. But we'll start out with our guests and then move around to all the hosts and with our basic question, which is, do you dig this show?
Yes, I dig this show. I have to tell you, this is the intersection of so many of my favorite things, honestly. It's obviously animation, it's Japanese culture, and the ancient world, and I am a hot springs fanatic. Side note that you might not know about is I used to write a blog called Swimming in LA when I used to live in Los Angeles. And I was like all about like reviewing different places to go swimming. And I'm from Nevada, which is, Sierra Nevada is like hot spring Mecca. And so I live to like soak, So not only is this just completely made for my very niche demographic, it's just so delightful. It's such a fun show that it's one of those things, like, it's so weird that and it's so like wrong that it's right or something, or it's just like, how does it work? I don't know, but it does. Mm-hmm. So I very much enjoyed it. I've always been like a fan of the manga and everything. I've never seen the film, to be totally honest, the live action.
I watched the music video based on the film, I think, which is two guys dressing up and fighting in a bathroom.
Yeah, it can be kind of tricky to track down. I've seen some clips.
It's on Crunchyroll if you have Crunchyroll.
Right.
Okay, good to know. And it's like a there's a whole franchise here to explore.
There's a sequel. I imagine it's a little more narrativized.
Sure.
But
yeah.
But yeah, I don't know. What about you, Elijah? How do you?
I'm usually the like big stick in the mud when it comes to animated and cartoons, and I know this, but I really dig this. This was so much fun. I was just like cackling to myself as I watched it, and I was asking questions of like, who is this for? Like, who is this audience? And I answered that question with Colin McCormick. Like, this was made for Colin, and he texts me, and he's like, the vibes. I'm watching it in the bath, and I'm like, "Yep, for Colin."
Yeah, I watched an episode, and then I paused it, and I drew a bath and got into the bathtub and watched like 5 more episodes.
That is hilarious, because I am not a person who likes to bathe in a bathtub. I love to like hot springs or even just swim in the swimming pool. But I too took a bath and watched one episode. It was that inspiring. So I love that we were on the same page about that.
Yeah. So even me, even the kind of stick in the mud that I usually am, this was so quirky and delightful and fun in so many ways. So yeah, I super dig it.
Can I follow that up, since Chiara shared a little bit? Like, what is your bathing experience, or like been to Roman or Japanese baths?
Like in my life, like just what have I gone
I figured
to?
we could all share that too, because we're all experts in baths, it seems like.
I like it. I know. Who knew? So obviously I've done a lot of like hot springs on the West Coast. I've never been to Japan, but it's like, I'll tell you a funny story. My kid one time asked me like, what is like your dream? Like if you could be any place right now, where would you want to be? And I was like, I want to be in the onsen with the snow monkeys.
Oh,
Yeah.
yes.
Mhm.
I was thinking about it because I was like, man, I was asking myself, I was watching the first episode. I'm like, bathing is like such a big part of Japanese culture. Like even the monkeys bathe, and then like the next episode, it's the monkeys in the hot springs.
I know everything. I love it. And so I will say, so I've never been to Japan, so I haven't had the bathing experience in Japan yet. It's like on the list. In Italy, I've obviously like gone into the sea, but I haven't gone to too many hot springs. Though there are some that are on my list. It's hard to get to them if you don't have a car and stuff. So it's a bit of a challenge. But 2 years ago, for Mother's Day, I took myself to a place called the Stufa di Nerone, which is in the Campi Flegrei, right outside of Kumai. And it's supposedly a bath that, like, the Nero's stove, right? That's what it's called.
Mm-hmm.
And supposedly it was, like, a place that has been in consistent use as a bath or as a hot spring since the antiquity. And it was really nice, actually. I really enjoyed it. And they have, like, this mud pit where you smear mud on yourself and like hang out in the mud. They have a like heated swimming pool. They have like saunas, everything. So that was a super fun experience that I had in Italy that I would say is probably the closest thing I've gotten to traditional Roman, bathing ever in my life.
Nice. Well, Elijah's been to Japan.
I have been to Japan. I was so very fortunate to visit my little sister who was studying abroad. And this was like 5-6 years ago now, which when I was looking for pictures, I was like, oh my God, this was a really long time ago. And that was terrifying. But we were in Tokyo for a little bit, and then she was at the University of Nagoya. So we were in like a kind of a smaller town, and we stayed in like a little old traditional hotel, like bamboo mats. And like, you pulled out the beds from the cupboards, and it had a little private onsen connected to the hotel. And it was the most fun experience. I was like there with my family. So it was my mom and my sister, and we got to go into the onsen. And I think, the big thing is we all have tattoos. And so sometimes it's like not kosher. It's not okay. But because it was like connected to the hotel, everybody seemed fine with it. But my sister, who like lived there for months, said that she would put bandages over her tattoos to go with her friends to the onsen.
Mm-hmm.
But it was just so much fun, and it looked exactly like the bath that he pops up in the first episode. There's like the tile floor and the little like buckets and the little stools and the little like faucets on the walls. I'm like, this looks exactly like it. It was so cool. It was so cool. And I feel so lucky to have that experience.
Yeah.
The closest thing I think I've ever done to, I'm not as well versed in natural hot springs or bathing culture, although I do love just taking baths in my own home. I do that constantly. I've ruined a computer or two because I was I was watching stuff in the bathtub and water got onto the keyboard and, busted some keys. But the closest thing I think that for me was when I was much, much younger. I was visiting my aunt who was living in Peru, and we went to where Machu Picchu is. And at the base of the sort of mountain where Machu Picchu is situated is a town called Aguascalientes, because they have these hot springs there. And it was okay. It was a little on the crowded side. The water was not super hot and it was dark, but I kind of got the vibe that the water had a lot of people in it. But it was still pretty cool and pretty fun. I like that a lot. What about you, Christy? Any good hot springs experience?
Yeah. So like actual Roman baths, like I've been to Piazza Armerina in Sicily a bunch, which is just going to see the mosaics is really cool. And then I went to the baths of Caracalla in Rome last time, which is like, if you need an easy day trip, I don't think it costs any money to check it out, but like a really cool site in Rome, go to the baths because they're really neat.
Yeah.
But ironically, like my actual bathing experience is all in Greece because I went to Thermopylae, which they have some hot springs there. I didn't get to bathe in it, but I got to touch the water. And
How would you describe the water at Thermopylae in terms of the odor?
It's very sulfurous, isn't it? It reminds me more of like the bad egg smell, and
it's very stinky. It's a stinky town, or it's downtown, a stinky place.
Hot Gates is a good name for it. But the actual,
it's called the Stinky Gates because it stinks so bad.
The fun one though is going to Thera, Santorini, and we took a sailboat to the caldera, and there is like where the water is heated and they have the special mud. So everyone jumps off the sailboat, covers themselves in mud and just hangs out for a bit. And like, that was probably my best bathing experience in something that wasn't a bathtub.
So we should probably contextualize a little bit for our audience. If they're not familiar with the show yet and wondering why we've been talking about bathing in hot springs, is the premise of this. First the manga and then this anime adapted from it is centered around Lucius Modestus, a Roman bath architect during the reign of Hadrian, who in a sort of desperate moment where he's desperate for new ideas to create novel, innovative baths for the Romans to satisfy their growing appetites for bathing, finds himself magically transported to Japan. And basically every episode, the show is very sort of serialized, although there are some continuing plots. Mm-hmm. But basically the formula is each episode he has some kind of problem. He's trying to create a bath for a particular situation. And he, through a sort of hot tub time machine situation, basically falls through to the future into Japan, where he experiences Japanese bathing culture and then brings what he learns back in time to ancient Rome to innovate the sort of whole bathing culture and save the empire.
Yeah. And Colin, did you dig it?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, if it wasn't obvious, a little context. So we've been, for the show, if you've been listening along, we've been watching a lot of television series set in Rome that are very drama heavy, very actorly, very serious and gravitas. And it's been very exhausting for me and a little bit of drudgery. And this was like water in the desert for me, or I guess it was like a hot bath. It was just so pleasant so much that I texted my co-host about how much I was enjoying it, and I got into the bathtub to watch it, if I haven't said that on mic already. And this was, I don't think I'm going to recommend anything we've reviewed on the show as hard as I would recommend this show. It is pure good vibes.
How did I know that? How did I know that from you, Colin?
This is my favorite thing I've reviewed so far. I was afraid I wasn't.
High praise.
Yeah. And there was Olivia in it. We still had Livia, just not Livia Drusilla.
I want to come back to Livia in a second, because I was afraid, because when I first heard about this, I was like, that sounds amazing. And I already love it on premise alone. And then when I started it, I was like, oh no, what if it's not good? What if I don't like it? And within about 10, 15 minutes, my fears were completely absolved, because not only also is it just this little episodic fun bit about time traveling, bathing culture, but also every episode ends with like a mini documentary where the creator, Mari Yamazaki, travels to a different onsen or bathhouse in Japan and like learns a little bit of it. And so it's like a little mini documentary, and it's wonderful. And it was what I needed. It was a great sort of palliative, particularly at the end of the semester when it's dark and cold and we just want to be done with grades and grading and teaching and things like that.
Yeah. Yeah. I will say that I dig this also, but for me, who like, I'm really into anime, I have to admit it was very jarring to see what I often attribute as like Japanese mannerisms to like a Western world. And like, that was so weird to think about, but I was also in love with it, because how often do you get this perspective of people that aren't British or aren't American recreating the Roman world, and you get a little bit of their own culture reflected in that reimagining. And so like, it was jarring at first, but it was such a cool experience that like I've never really seen before when watching all of the stuff about Rome we've been watching recently. So that was really cool.
For sure.
Yeah, I would say I was thinking about that also. And I was reading around and somebody talked about this idea of like reverse reception, which I thought was really useful here because, I think so much of what we're looking at is this straight line of, Rome, Britain, us, or something like that. Right?
Yes.
So this was, I would say, right, he's taking Japanese culture back with him, but it's also reflected even just like you said, Christian, like this infusion of maybe Japanese mannerisms culture, language, even somewhat. Especially in the dubbed version, there's like some weird stuff, things that like don't come through in translation quite. Sort of being like retrojected back into Rome, which I don't think we see that a ton in a lot of the film and television adaptations of the ancient world. So that was like a nice. I don't know. Yeah, it's weird, but it's like kind of felt good. I like that about it.
Speaking very broadly, but like anime it tends to be very mannered, right? Where it's sort of a hyper realistic kind of genre where the way people act and behave is very dialed up a lot. And then we get that kind of just the way people like the intensity of everything when he eats something so good, he cries, and the sort of fervor that everybody has for whatever it is they're doing, right? For building baths or the civic pride. And what I thought also I found kind of so interesting is the sort of through line, the cultural inroads that the show kind of makes, where as I was watching one of an interview with the creator, she basically was saying how like the premise, the origin of the show was she was living abroad for a very long time. She spent something like 20 years living abroad. And the thing she missed most was baths and bathing. And particularly she was living in Italy, but also Portugal and the UK and I think the US at some points. And
she lives in Chicago now, apparently.
Yeah. And so we should have got her on the show.
Ouch. We love you, Chiara.
No, not as instead of Chiara, like
in addition to, yes.
Yes, thank you. But most of these places will have just like a tiny apartment with a shower, right? That's like a pretty standard thing in say like Italy. And her longing for bathing culture, and then also just the connection of like I guess this is maybe my first question of like the cultural importance placed on baths and bathing, both for Rome, but then also in Japan as the show kind of constructs it, right? Like the way like baths are so integral to everything happening kind of in the world, right? They are like the expression of Romanitas, if we could call it that.
I would say, obviously it's like over the top, and that's part of the charm of it. And I would be curious to hear what you guys think about Lucius Modestus, right? And then his earnestness in his approach to the world. Because obviously that's, I think part and parcel of this over the top approach to it. But I kind of like it as I don't know if I'm a Roman historian per se, but as a classics person, like I do think so much emphasis in media and even in class, like even in the context of school, is like the usual battles, gladiators, Julius Caesar. It's so hard to work against that. And, this is totally your like thinking about the Roman Empire every day nonsense. So this just offers this totally different way into understanding like the glue that held Rome together, the thing that made it work. So like we all overplay gladiator battles as, this unique, essential element of what it meant to be Roman. Why not baths? I say yes. Like, sure, why not? Let's overstate the case slightly, but I'm okay with it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love that vision of it, because I think it's so true that we focus so much on the military and the violent side of things. And like there wasn't really any of that in this story. There was one time where he like fought a guy with a broom, right? Because he was being rude in the bath. But like that was the most violence that we had in this Roman story. And I feel like that's so unheard of, to tell a story about ancient Rome without focusing on some aspect of violence.
Hey, there was some actual plotting happening in the last episode between the Senate and the Emperor, which was very on par for more of the shows we were watching. And
but it was solved by a good bath, right? It was like all of our problems can be solved if we just relax and we all calm down. And I kind of love that.
Yeah.
And, it's archaeologically thinking, especially in the military presence, is like baths were actually essential for building community between soldiers on the front lines and the people that they were conquering in a lot of ways. And it was also we're our most vulnerable, right? When you're not wearing any clothes and you're taking a bath, and that is a shared space. And what does it say to, you could be bathing with the emperor as easily as just a lowly soldier in some ways. Now, the emperor probably has his own abode, as we saw many a time, but it didn't seem that extreme when you actually stop to think about it, because baths were something built into Roman forts on the front line to help.
To even just Roma, that they're so integral to civic life for Romans that I think it's telling that baths in Rome weren't just baths. They also were gyms. They were social events, right? Where you go, and there's poems and other literary evidence about people, it's kind of part of your social life to hang out at the baths and get the gossip and the news and get dinner invitations. And, there was politicking. Baths would also they would even have libraries and public venues, right? They were cultural centers. And, I'm trying to think of maybe there were a closer equivalent is a YMCA or something like that. But they serve a civic function, and they are a part of daily life. And they're when I take students abroad and whenever you get to a Roman site anywhere in the Mediterranean, there's almost always a bath. And it's one of the most easily identifiable buildings you can encounter. Totally. They have a very, very iconic architecture. There's things like mosaics that will jump right out. They're a center for art and sculpture. Mm-hmm. There's a whole episode. I love that there was a whole episode about the sort of what art he's displaying in the bath. It's a place for viewing. There's so many things that baths did for Rome that in some ways are kind of alien to us because they aren't in our, my bathtub is not a part of my social life. It's the opposite. It's a very reclusive space for me, but for them it was part of this larger culture. I lost the thread there, but someone please take it away.
I think the comparison, so Andy and I have been going to a local rec center, and I used to have a gym membership at Planet Fitness, and it seems like such a performative space for a very specific group, but an actual rec center for the community, it's depending on the time of day, we have figured it out because we've gone at different times. So you have the old folks hanging out early in the morning, very sweet, want to chat you up. You have the after school crowd that they're half the time sitting on their phones on the machines and half the time trying to impress their friends doing too much weights. And then tonight we learned the late night crew is more of the serious, closer to our age gym people. And it's so cool to see that huge difference of community coming into that space and using it and socializing in it in different ways, that it's really fun to then take those ideas Mari Yamazaki was taking of her experience of those spaces in Japan, and then that's what we all do, right? We try to understand the past based on our own experiences and what we enjoy and how we interact with others. And this was a new and different way to see it for me as part of a Western audience.
So I'll ask a question because I'm just curious to just dig in a little more. What was your favorite innovation that, that Lucius came back with and implemented? What was your, what tickled you the most of his?
I loved his reimagining of the lazy river by putting actual wooden horses in it so that kids could learn how to ride. I love that.
There is something kind of true to Roman that of course it would be some kind of military training or something like that. The water slide. I kind of like the one where he reinvents hotel culture in Rome. For the idea of a hotel with quality hotel service and a meal and, music and dinner and things like that.
When he stayed in the taverna that was all run down and he kind of whipped it into shape.
I will say that episode was a little bit the most disturbing for me because he returns basically after having received a foot job in the bath. And I'm wow. Okay.
Why did this just get randomly weird?
This is a sidebar, but I, for the longest time, thought Lucius was supposed to leave his wife. That was kind of where we were building. And maybe I imagined this, but I thought he was going to find love in the future or something.
I did too.
He is. Spoiler alert. So I don't want to ruin anything for anybody, but if you've read through the whole manga, so basically what there is in this season is the first volume. It's split into 6 volumes in Japan and it's 3 volumes in the States. So the first volume is the first 2 in Japan put together. So this season covered most of that first English volume and a little bit of the second. But in the second and third volumes, he meets this girl in the future named Satsuki, who is a geisha who is like a fangirl of ancient Rome and knows Latin. And so they strike up a relationship, and he ends up staying in Japan for longer. And there's this whole plot about like this Yakuza group that's trying to like take over this spa town and develop it. And, and then there's like the old schoolers who want to preserve it the way that it is. So there's that like tradition versus innovation, motif that's present throughout. And then they end up getting together, and actually like it ends with them having a baby. And she goes back to Rome with him. So
wow, this is what Hallmark movies could be, right? I'm tired of, I don't need Ms. Business saving Christmas for the Christmas tree farm, right? I want this time traveling spa
hot tub time machine,
hot tub geisha.
Okay, interesting. Okay, so that changed because the end of this episode, or the end of the season, caught me by surprise a little bit, where Hadrian reunites him with his wife, and I was like, oh, I thought, anyway.
Yeah, I know. Same.
I'm curious to see, I was looking around to find out, is there going to be a second season? I cannot find anything, so I really don't know. And if anybody out there knows, or if you guys know anything about it, please share. But it's pretty quiet. It seems like there's space for that. There's certainly like a continuation of the story in the manga. Mm-hmm. So I think that the inclusion of that character, this sort of geisha character, was a nod towards this figure, Satsuki, but I don't know if she'll come back. I don't know if it'll be her, or if it was just sort of like a wink at that plot line. So yes, it's very sort of unclear, like what. Well,
and through Netflix, because we know that from the Parlopanidis brothers doing Blood of Zeus. Like how many years? 3 years between season 1 and season 2. So
like that is coming back, but yes, it's like a little more nebulous what's happening here. I hope so.
Mm-hmm.
Particularly like post writer's strike, I don't know. And Netflix really seems to be like, the whole streaming industry right now is in this weird kind of fulcrum, it feels like, where it's kind of the bubble is maybe bursting or has burst. And so a lot of things have been getting canceled or moved around. So everything is in this weird limbo. So who's to say?
Yeah.
Eli, do you have a favorite one?
I really liked the warm floors where they just like lay and relax on the floors, because I feel like that would feel so good.
So if you go to the Korean spa in Los Angeles, or probably any not every Korean spa has it, but they have it in the Korean spas, and it is the most wonderful thing. You lay on these little thin mattresses on the floor, and it's like heated, and it feels so amazing. I have had that experience.
I want that so bad. I just want to lay on the floor and be warm.
That's like the seat warmers in my car. That's the best innovation ever.
Yes, I love seat warmers.
I actually don't like car seat warmers because they make me feel like I need to pee. And like paranoid that I am peeing. That's like kind of.
You never lived in the Midwest, did you? Those things are necessary.
I'm
New York,
from upstate. Yeah, like I'm aware of the cold. No, like my mom like loves heated seats in the car. She's like adamant about it, but like for some reason I just like I don't know. It's too weird for me. What about you, Chiara? Do you have a highlight?
Speaking of peeing, I guess I think I did really enjoy the water slide one. Mm-hmm. Having just gone to Holiday World like 2 or 3 months ago, I was feeling very, like into that with my kids and everything. But I really liked the bidet. I really liked when he was in the showroom and then he saw the fish thing, or I guess it wasn't a fish tank, it was a television.
Yeah, with the jellyfish.
Right. So how he recreated that for Hadrian and then had that funny little bidet, which like looked like the Novae a little bit, right? Just like the continuously running water. And that episode was just funny because it was like he wasn't exactly in a bathing context, right? He was in the store. And so the girls were like kind of tripping out, or like, who is this guy? Like there was some like humor there. And then the fact that he like had to go to the bathroom the whole time and stuff. And was like, so I appreciated the sort of like lower bodily stratum element of that one. I thought there was like a lot of humor there.
Yeah. In addition to just the recurring joke of every time he pops up in Japan, he is just butt ass naked. But the running joke of like that he's like cut, right? And everybody acknowledges it. That he's and like somebody at one point says he looks like a Greek statue. And that and generally all the Romans seem like they are hitting the gym twice a day. But I do really like that he kind of the humor of him standing up in his like perfectly sculpted physique, you know, and then inspecting Baz.
Yeah, I couldn't decide half the time if like people were just, I know Japanese culture is often portrayed as like very helpful and everything like that. But it's like, is it because he's so attractive and a foreigner, or like that's really just how Japanese people are?
Everybody
all the time,
rolls with
like,
it, right?
Yeah, they really do.
Oh.
Which I think is part of just like the magic of this show is just that nobody really like questions anything. They're just like, wow, seems like you're having a hard time. You want some food or some sake, or here, have a bath. And it's like everybody's taking a big, deep breath and they can just be kind to each other. I'm like, wow, what a way to go about your life in the world. We need more.
I guess I think like the Xenia factor, the hospitality factor, like obviously is important in antiquity. I think that maybe Mari Yamazaki is also trying to push a slightly different portrait of the Japanese as not like closed off for, you know, this like isolated sort of, I don't know about isolated, but just this monoculture, right? That they're still kind of like welcoming and open and sort of willing to accept the foreigner in their own way, right? So I think that's like kind of a nod to like, yes, we also practice hospitality. But B, like we're also maybe different than that stereotypical picture you might have of us in our culture, which I kind of appreciated too.
Sure.
And also with the commonalities, I'm thinking of the episode where he meets the bath architect from modern day Japan who has the same, you know, the problem with like satisfying the client and, you know, is the client, what if the client is gaudy, which also was a funny little note about where Lucius is very disparaging of freedmen and the sort of nouveau riche in Rome, which had it felt very Petronius Satyricon, like Great Gatsby, like mocking the formerly enslaved, now rags to riches individuals who in Rome, there is some connotations you get of them as a little on the gaudier side with their choices and things like their funerary decorations and the houses they build and the parties they throw and things like that. You get that in, I think, both material and literary evidence.
This brings me to an important question real quick. Did you guys watch it in dubbed English or did you watch the subs?
Subs for me.
Okay, subs for me.
I watched it dubbed.
Okay. I did watch it dubbed, but I sometimes I switched. I would like go back and forth to like see if something was different, but I mostly did dubbed.
For dubbed, you guys missed the best part of that scene where the statues of Venus, and they're talking about like, we want her really voluptuous. The way it's said in Japanese is boing boing. And
no. Why does it have to be that weird?
And I like how the sculptor is like, I don't know if I can make them that big. Like it's like a structural issue at that point of like, I don't know if I can carve them actually that way.
Again, I'm like, who is the audience for this? Like, is this for like tiny children or is this for like I don't know.
I mean, if you like, it's so fitting for like actual other anime that I'm very much used, especially isekai sort of anime is very in this thread of things. So how was the Latin then? Because I realized that every once in a while Latin was actually spoken, but because it was always a foreign language to me, I'm like, oh wait, that's not Japanese anymore. That's
I would say
Latin.
there was quite a bit of Latin actually, and I was dying to kind of figure out who wrote all that Latin, and I couldn't. I looked through the credits and stuff, and I couldn't discern any particular person, but I am very curious to know like who advised on that or who did the translating or whatever. I think she did some of it in the actual manga. Like there is Latin in the manga, obviously, too, but it seemed like there was maybe more. I didn't go back and like hyper inspect it, but what I was catching like sounded pretty good.
Same, yeah. I was like, he says like like gratias ago or something, and I'm like, all right, like you've got like some of the pattern down, and there was some things when he was saying something about the money that he was like using his money and he wanted to buy the guy's modern money, that I was like, is that the word we would use for that? But like most of it seemed, again, it seemed to like, okay, that works.
Yeah, I had no nitpicky. I definitely watched not all of, but part of a sort of YouTube video of a kind of spoken Latin guru who went through and listened to the Latin in all of the different dubs. So not just the Japanese dub, like so the way the Latin was spoken by the Japanese voice actors, but also the Italian and the French and the Portuguese and the English and things like that. And it was pretty interesting. One of the things that he noticed was that in the Italian dub, they changed the Latin. So like there's one part, like one of the first things he says in the first episode is he says like, ducere amicum meum possum or something like that. Like, can I bring my friend is the idea. Or in the Italian, they changed the wording around and it was something like a hic ferro or they changed. And maybe there was something to that of the Italians being like, no. It was supposed to be like this or something like that. But there is a fair amount of that video that I watched was mostly focused on the phonology and the phonetics of all of the syllables and vowels and consonants and stuff, which for me is a diminishing returns avenue. But grammar wise, I think it was, I was fine, but also, I was just so happy to be there. I'm not going to come at it for the Latin. That's not
right.
No, I think it's so fun that like we know what he's saying, even if he's speaking Latin, there's like subtitles and what the people speaking Japanese are saying. Like we are hearing as the audience both sides of this conversation, but they can't understand each other. And I love that dynamic because they're just playing off of each other and trying to work out. And he's like, he's trying to poison me when he like has the bad sake. And he's like, dude, I'm so sorry. Like, let's get you something else. And just like that back and forth and that confusion and that tension, I think makes such a wonderful and engaging story. And I really love it.
In the dubs, is it kind of the same where like when he goes to Japan, he's now speaking in Latin and then the rest of the time he's okay.
Except if it's in his head. If he's like speaking in his head, it's like English, I guess. But if he speaks out loud, it's Latin.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
There were a couple weird moments where it would say something. I wish I could like conjure up.
There was one at the very end, which was to me, maybe it was I don't know if you guys saw this, but the last like shot is this like epitaph that says Omnes Thermae Roman, but then I think it's supposed to say Ducant with a C, but it looked very much like a G to me. And I couldn't decide, was it just a weird font choice or was it a kind of trip at the finish line thing?
Yeah, that was weird. I remember that. I found this, I wrote down, it said, I hope your body betrays you to the fury of Brunus. Maybe like Brutus? I was still like, I don't know what that means, but every once in a while there would be just a weird little thing like that. But there's like a charm to that because it's sort of this lost in translation. Like, we're at like so many removes, right? We're doing Latin through Japanese, dubbed into English. So I'm like, hey, whatever works here is fine. But yeah, every once in a while there'd be like something little like that. But I feel the same way. Like I'm not going to like pick apart the Latin necessarily. It's just nice that there is Latin there. And I would just say this generally about the whole series is like Yamazaki, it's almost like this like edutainment thing going on, right?
Oh yeah.
You get just a little bit of Latin, you get all of this architectural drawings and just dropping in like a little reference to the insulae or a little reference to, and just enough to like pique your interest if you don't know what it is, but to like appease those of us who do know what's going on. Be like, oh yeah, she kind of like knows her stuff. And also I think just emphasizing how like you can learn a lot through like maybe visual communication. It doesn't have to be like someone lecturing you about it. Like just by looking at, the statues or the structures, the buildings. When he draws the little plan for the guy of the bath for the art, it's got the little like, caldarium, like all that on it. Like just in that, I just felt like there was such a great balance struck of like entertaining us, but also educating us at the same time. That was very savvy to me.
Yeah. And you like when they go to Tivoli, that was the one that really jumped out at me. And I'm like, oh, Tivoli, that's right. And it looks like that was Tivoli, right? I was looking right at it with his, Hadrian's. First of all, like if I were ever to build a house for myself, that's like kind of gold standard. I feel like I would love to build a micro, like inside my house, to have a micro house with a moat around it I could. That sounds ideal.
Yeah, no, I definitely like ran and like looked up different pictures of like, they call it's like the Maritime Theater, right? It's the big structure. And I was like, oh, I forget what that looks like. And I was like, it looks exactly like that. It's that big circular thing. And yeah, that was Hadrian's Villa was so much fun. Even from an archaeological perspective, it was like, this is so much fun.
And the little shouts to Antinous, one of my favorite characters from Roman history. I think my fun fact that I always tell my students is in like Greece, there's a lot of Antinous statues, and I'll get to the statue and I'll be like, okay, like off the top of your heads, who do you think is the most portrayed person in like Roman history, right? You think it'd be like Caesar or Augustus or somebody like that. I'm like, no, it's this kid right here. We have more images of this kid than any other living person in all of Rome.
And he died in the Nile.
Right. Which is also scandalous, right? Maybe, who knows what would happen there. So I had a question that was one of the things that I was kind of thinking about as I was watching is the sort of a kind of very Roman thing, but the cultural anxiety, because every time Lucius ends up in Japan, one of the thing that breaks his brain is how this culture could be so much more advanced than Rome, and what we can learn and bring back. And this kind of like, I called it in my notes, the Graecia Capta, kind of like, this is the Roman cultural anxiety of like, what if we're not the best? And then encountering evidence to support that theory, right? And like, how do you reconcile that? And yeah, I don't know if any of you had thoughts sort of about that.
Actually, yeah, I was totally thinking about this because like the other part I really liked about this show is like, we have the word Romanization, right? Like this idea that as Rome expanded, Roman culture spread to all of these other people. And it, for a more general audience, it's kind of the assumption of like, the Romans aren't adopting stuff. They are administering things to others. And I liked that this show was intentionally upending that idea of like Lucius on the sly is going to Japan, getting all these great innovative ideas for baths. And he feels guilty half the time of like using it, but not admitting he's like getting it from this group of people he doesn't know how. And I really like that concept. And I wish it could have been shown in a way that, well, this is actually what was happening in Rome all the time, right? They are in contact with all these different cultures, and they are, yes, they're introducing stuff to those cultures. He got so excited when he's like, oh, an architect, he's building the Roman way. Yay, someone likes us.
Or like he sees the bowl in the tourist shop and he's like, oh, a Greek meander. Like they also must be borrowing from Greek. I'm like, they're so much better than Greek. Like, how do you like, and that cooks his brain a little bit.
So I like that it's showing that concept that, cultural ideas are not a one-way street like we often assume with Rome. I just wish they would have shown that a little bit more in Rome proper itself, like in Judea or something like that.
Yeah.
I think how should I put this? So this goes back to like the earnestness of Lucius a little bit, and his sort of like single-minded devotion to like Romanitas and like what it means to be a Roman, right? Like it's bizarrely like endearing because it's so like over the top in a sense. But yet like he's not over the top. Like that's the funny thing about it is he's Modestus, right? Like he's the modest, humble guy or whatever. But like, I think, his brain gets like broken. And he has, these feeling like this inferiority complex or something. But I feel like as the series goes on, it gets like it goes less from being a threat to being like a feeling of admiration. Like he feels less anxious about it. I think the guilt is sort of still there about like using this and bringing it back. But it does seem like his mind gets like open a little bit more to like having some regard for these people and, being able to be like, okay, wow, this, there are things to learn here from these amazing, advanced humans that or this culture that is not Rome, right? So it's like Rome for him. At first, it seems super threatening to not be the center of the universe, but somehow he adjusts. And so I liked that because I do feel like, kind of speaking to Christy's point, it's like it was a two-way street. And yes, maybe it didn't depict that on the ground in, Rome in the 2nd century, but like that process we do still see it happening. And, maybe it's an overly rosy picture because, of course, yes, all the bloodshed and the murder and mayhem that it takes to get to that point is elided here, certainly. And so there is a little bit of an issue there, I would say, insofar as like, he doesn't walk away thinking like Rome isn't great. Like Rome is still great.
Right.
It's not like he changes that much. He doesn't become a critic, but I do think it's just still instructive to be able to say in this very subtle way, like, oh no, the Romans are taking from others and absorbing from others. They're not all just like, yes, doling it out and doing it their way. Right. So I appreciated that about it, but I do find myself at times being like, this is a little celebratory in this unironic way of Rome, but maybe it's winking at me the whole time. I couldn't quite tell. I don't know. Like, and I'm curious to hear what you guys think too, like about like this depiction of Hadrian as this sort of like good guy, just sort of it's like they nodded towards him being like a complicated figure, but like really he comes off as like it's a pretty sanitized version of him, I would say. So I'm also kind of curious to hear your thoughts about all of that. That was a lot.
I liked Lucius's like I guess attitude toward everything because it felt very real and very Roman. Of like, of course he would think that Roman's the center of the earth and that they do everything the best. And so it made a lot of sense that this would keep challenging that for him. And I liked that was, if you could even call it like a conflict, that was his conflict, was like, can I learn something new? Oh, I can. Great. And that seemed to really like line up with a lot of just what we kind of know about Roman culture in like, as a whole, of just sort of thinking that, yep, we're going to do it the Roman way, which is the right way, whether or not we admit that we're, using this two-way street and gaining a lot of things from others. We're just going to call it Roman, and then it is Roman. And I liked that kind of that give and take. And it made a lot of sense to me that, of course, a Roman would think like this. Of course, a Roman, if they showed up in any modern day scenario, would have these reactions and would think about things in this way. I liked that. I thought it was fun.
Yeah. I think there was one really other subtle change was like initially when he first went there, he assumed all of the flat-faced people were slaves.
Yeah.
And I think he slowly kind of drops that idea eventually of assuming that there's...
Is this the show being like self-disparaging about other Japanese people? Because it's sort of like all of the Romans were drawn as like these like physical like sculpture people walking around, or at least a lot of them. And then when he's in modern day Japan, everybody is much older and kind of less, cut, for lack of a better word. That seemed to be a fair amount of humor that he's there, that he's this like kind of Greek god statue, and then he's surrounded by a bunch of middle-aged kind of slightly dopey guys and things like that. But I don't know. I was wondering, am I thinking too hard about this? Is it like negging on itself?
I think I wondered if that was like a subtle change, because he eventually drops the slave part, but he continues to call them the flat-faced people. He never endeavors to communicate in a way to like actually learn about them. He's more just obsessed with the things they're doing as opposed to like who they are as a people, which also makes sense actually, right? Like of how he's dealing with that anxiety initially of like, oh, look how advanced these people are. But I can learn to do that. I can accomplish these things. I can help use it to make Rome great. And therefore, I'm on an equal footing with them at the end of the day. And so it's weird because we've talked about that too, right? Of in I Claudius, or I can't remember which, we've done so many shows about like how it's British actors. Yeah, how the British actors are talking about how bad slaves are from Britannia, and they're like, oh. So it feels like, if we're thinking about the author being Japanese, and like, are these like backhanded compliments of Japanese culture, or like, sometimes it's hard to read in that regard, which makes it fun, honestly.
Yeah, I think what I really liked about this show and found so refreshing, particularly in contrast to all of the heavy drama that we've just been watching, is its just earnestness. And like sometimes, yes, that bleeds into jingoism, I guess, but or at least on the Lucius side. But I did really like how sort of earnest it is, even if it is maybe reductive or something. But that's what I kind of liked so much. And then this theme, particularly in that episode where it's in Rome, there are these sort of German veterans who are roughhousing and horseplaying in the baths, and then in Japan, it's a bunch of Russian tourists, I think, or something like that.
Yep.
And this this theme, and just even throughout the show, but especially in that episode of like baths, that's this like cultural bridge, right, where we can overcome our differences and disagreements, with a good soak,
as long as you behave, which is interesting to think about, right?
Yeah, full on follow the rules. But that's only I feel like that's reasonable. But that isn't. I think that's not really an answer. I think to Chiara's question. But
I don't know that we answered your question.
Well, that's okay. I don't know if there is an answer to my question, but I guess I just found myself sometimes being like, am I getting like sucked into this rosy? Like, should I be being more critical of this, or can I just like enjoy this?
Yeah.
Because I do think there's a way you could like rip this apart, right?
Sure.
And be like, this is like problematic because it is sort of like celebrating Rome and, taking out like the colonization aspect and the like ugly side of like this. But no, I mean, I think the point is to, like you said, like kind of celebrate bathing as the civilizing factor, the thing that these cultures share, a point of contact, a point of continuity, a point of like similarity for them. And so, I think I'm going into it, I understand like that's what this is about, helps to say, okay, we don't, and not only that, like we can get all the battles and the bloodshed everywhere else. I just feel like there's so much of that, right? And so I'm giving it a little bit of a pass. And also because I would say like, you can tell like she's been pretty thoughtful about like situating it within this narrative of, Hadrian's reign. And there is some politicking certainly going on in terms of like how the emperors are using the baths to curry favor and, to create, goodwill towards whatever the successor among the people. And so there is like this aspect of it, I think, that is still acknowledging something more cynical.
I like we get a young Marcus Aurelius who's this like wunderkid, like natural leader from a young age. And he's like, I wonder, this guy's going places. And that feels like one of those, I don't know what to call this trope, right? But you get the child version of the kid who's going to be famous in the future.
Yep.
I'm suddenly reminded of maybe the most random example of it, but in the movie Shanghai Nights, we meet a young Charlie Chaplin.
Oh my God. Yes.
If anybody remembers the sequel to Shanghai Noon. I wonder if that our hesitancy or maybe of like the questioning of like, should we be critical of a reception like this? And I wonder if that's sort of just a product of like the current state of scholarship and academia and reception, where so much of like, if you spend any time on like any sort of classics oriented blog or reception work and journal, and it's very much diving into the kind of ways things have been reduced or simplified, and how that creates sort of problematic aspects of classical reception. That's been the soup we've been swimming in. Part of maybe like this is to take the metaphor, right? This felt like a refreshing bath because it was just like, I just don't have to worry about like, or I don't want to worry about, is this a problematic work of reception? Because I can sense its sort of earnesty and it's sort of like the good intentions behind it. And I'm like, fine, I'm ready to just let it wash over me.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And sometimes we need that. Like Andy hadn't seen what I was watching for this week. And then he saw a thing. It's like, okay, what is this? What is this about? It's like, well, what's like one thing that's in common between Rome and modern day Japan? And his first response was emperor. And I'm like, you know what? You're not wrong. But like, and that's what's kind of interesting, right? Like you don't explore imperial Japan in that way, even though it's hinted at in Rome. And that is another kind of connecting feature between those cultures that's not the focus though. And I think that's refreshing in and of itself, because similar to the show Rome, it's like we love that we get to see the little people while the crazy Julius Caesars of the world are going off and doing crazy things. You're just trying to live your life. And
I was just thinking about that when Colin was talking about seeing this Marcus Aurelius. Like, you're seeing it through the eyes of Lucius, just like Pullo and Varenus. Like, you know, you're just kind of like, it's like all focalized through them, right? So like at the end when they like rescue the Caesarian or whatever, you know, like it's kind of that same structure. And I kind of wonder, like, I'm sure she probably watched Rome.
Sure.
Maybe, you know, maybe that was a source of inspiration for her, was just to structure it in that way through the eyes of like regular Joe Roman, but instead of a soldier, like he's an architect, right? And that's gonna appeal to her own sensibilities as an artist, of course. And
like, we just don't get that a lot.
Well, there's also like other, I feel like, Joe Romans in the show as well. Like his friend who's like the sculptor, his friend who like sells the kebabs or something, right? And like has a family, or like he like meets everyday people, and it's like they are also using, enjoying, and benefiting from the bath. And like that's like the overarching point, right? Is that like all of these people, even if they're not the emperor, are still a part of this. And that's still important.
And to the point that like a theme of this show is kind of celebrating maybe undersung aspects of both cultures, or to the point where we don't really get a lot. We get flashes of like gladiators and soldiers, but we don't really spend a lot of time with any of the tropier parts you think of when you think of Rome, aside from just some brief cameos like chariots and gladiators and armies clashing. And on the flip side, right, we don't see any like samurai or anything like that. All the things that you might, the parts of Japanese culture that are kind of inundated in popular media, you know, it's really it's just like, well, let's think about the baths. Like, we don't spend enough time in the baths. I think if the show had a thesis, that might be it.
I will say, though, if you watch enough anime, every slice of life sort of show is going to end up at the bath eventually.
That makes sense. As we like hit 1 hour here, I want to like ask you guys about other bathing cultures. Like because this made me think about like what other cultures have like really, really strong
like
bathing.
Turkish bath or like Russian bathhouses. Yeah.
So so the other thing, so Turkish baths came to mind.
Yeah.
But also, I mean, I live in northern Minnesota, and I cannot escape like this like Nordic Scandinavian sauna culture that is up here, which has like the, you know, the cold plunge where you jump in Lake Superior through the ice and then you jump in the hot sauna. And like, I could see that.
Insane.
It was really fun, Colin. We had a good time.
Lake Superior, how cold is Lake Superior in the winter?
Very, very. It's like a foot of ice that we have to cut through when we jump in.
Yikes.
But like that's like what happens in like the first episode, right? Like they go between the hot and the cold, and it like does something to like regulate your nervous system. I don't know, something health. But it made me think of like aspects of other cultures that also would have this in common. Because I think it's very, very clear that we see this dialogue between Roman bathing and Japanese bathing. But I think there's aspects that we could like find in other places as well.
Go worldwide with it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Or like the other part that I absolutely loved was the food stuff. Like,
oh yeah.
Yeah.
That especially the steamed bun, red paste, red bean paste bun. Yeah. It's like, oh, I want one of those so badly.
When he orders ramen, I was starting to get, I was like, man, I made the wrong choice for dinner tonight.
Yeah.
And then there's a scene where the creator, she in one of the documentaries, she goes to like a hotel, and they show the meal that she eats, and she gets like some sashimi and like a little hot pot where she cooks it. I'm like, that looks so freaking good.
Yeah, I feel like food is probably the strongest equivalent that I could see across multiple cultures. And like I've always like said, my favorite thing about traveling is going and experiencing not just like the food, but the actual dining experience, especially like getting out of the United States, because like our dining experience sucks. But yeah, I feel like that. I like that was incorporated a lot too. And that we got to see like, okay, how's he going to try and recreate fruit milk?
Right. It was so good.
in Rome. And I think at some point he like calls something garum, right? It tastes
it's
like
fish
garum.
Sauce. Yeah. He's like, this is garum. I'm like, Yeah.
That sent me down a whole rabbit hole about like, has garum survived in other world cuisines and things like that?
Yes.
Or like, are there precedents in Comparanda?
And he brought the little piece of gyoza back.
I was wondering. Okay, so this is maybe a question. This is maybe a question to wrap it up. There's a question that Eli and I have pondered a lot, but we can make it more specific, right? If you were to have a Lucius experience where you time travel from some modern place back to ancient Rome, right? What would you bring with you, or what would you want to bring with you if you were to reintroduce something into the Roman world or the antique world, which the world of antiquity?
So we're bringing something from the modern to the ancient.
Yes, right. You come back with a stuffed teddy bear or a piece of gyoza or something like that.
I always think, when I think about this question, which apparently I think about kind of often now that you've brought it up, I always think they would be fascinated by anything that can like record something, like a photograph, like a camera, or like a tape recorder. I mean, I know that's not super sophisticated technology. Like if they could hear recorded music, right? It wasn't live. Or if they could see like that you could take a picture and like have it and then be away from someone and still have their image or still be able to hear their voice. To me, like, I think that would like blow their freaking minds. I mean, yes, like an airplane or whatever, also that, but like, I just think, I don't know, because I'm maybe just like a people person or something, or there's something emotional about it, that would be so mind blowing for ancient people. I don't know.
Yeah, my mind went to like music. I'm like, I want to bring Olivia Rodrigo to the Romans.
Yeah, could you bring the blues or something back in time?
No, I'm going to bring Gen Z pop.
Yeah, even just like I think a musical instrument would be fun, because there's like different variations and versions of them in the ancient world. But I think seeing like, you know, what thousands of years will do to a musical instrument to bring it back, I think that would be really fun as well.
I guess we're disregarding the Prime Directive. Like, we don't have to worry about like,
yeah, totally,
up this culture by like giving them something that they're like not ready for.
Right.
I would introduce toilet paper though. I really feel that we got.
That was one of mine. I was like, mass produce toilet paper.
Or somebody even just said once, like, germ theory, the idea of germ theory. If you could plant that seed, that could go a long way.
Humoral pathology sticks around for a long time.
Right. Like, just bring them some antibiotics. That might also be like, you know,
some mold on some bread. Like, wait, we can do something.
We come back around bidets, right? Maybe there would be a way to bring bideting.
The bidet was smart. I'm like, oh, that was a good call. Lucius is looking at this sponge on a stick. And he's like, this cannot be sanitary.
Let's not do this.
That seems like such a
I was like, he's sort of ahead of his time there, thinking that there's something problematic about that. But you know, I think just at the end of the day, this show, apart from the like we could all take more baths theme, was about like I said, I'm somewhere earlier on, like this tradition versus innovation pool, like. And it's funny because like he encounters like all these old people all the time, like in Japan. And like where the show starts off from is that he wants to create old fashioned-y baths. Like that's what he wants to do, is like bring back or preserve this old kind of bath. And everybody's like, no. It's like there's this like new way of doing things. And so the internal struggle that he has between like innovating by bringing the stuff from the future back, and like his self, he's like an old timey, like traditional, like virtus pietas disciplina guy. It reflects the broader, I think, Roman as a culture issue that they had also with that, right? Like the good old days of the Republic, right? Versus the decadent and luxurious, you know, decline that we have, you know, like that we've sunk ourselves into that whole discourse, right? So there's something like very Roman, I think, about like watching that all play out in the guise of just this one figure. And I think like Japan probably has a really similar concern as a very traditional culture, polytheistic culture, you know, this sort of reverence for your elders kind of culture. Like, how do we balance the old and the new, you know?
And one that modernized so quickly. We're like, I don't know if there's any other country on earth that went through a modernization as dramatic and as rapid as Japan did, where they went from life in the 1600s to life in the early 19th century, like in a matter of years, which I think about sometimes, because I don't know if any of you have been watching Demon Slayer, but I like sent me down this rabbit hole because that show is set in the Taisho period, which I like learned is like a very tiny window. It's like only like maybe 12 years or so, like right between basically the reopening of Japan and then eventually like the new democracy and then the takeover by the government. But it's like in this basically like 15 or so year period, they went from like everybody is living like it's the 1600s to now there's like telephone lines and trains and like modern technology everywhere, which right, just in your own lifetime to witness like 100 years worth of innovation happen right in front of you. Yeah, that's wild to think about to me.
Definitely.
But excellent. So I guess we're kind of coming up on a natural end. If anyone has any sort of other closing thoughts, take more baths.
I just have to think. I think Livia would have been perfectly happy for Lucius to be gone all the time. We've seen enough Roman woman lives in the other shows to be like, she'd probably be down for that, honestly.
Yeah, why is she so mad?
Why is she so mad?
He works too hard. I don't know what's going on there. I mean, I got maybe this is just me, but I got the impression that Lucius has never touched his wife.
Yes, I got that impression too.
She was like, maybe we could have a baby, and he was like, huh? And I was like, is this like a gay thing? Like, you know, we got Hadrian in here already.
Sure.
Like, you know, is this where this is going? But like, it's not where it goes in the manga. Intriguingly,
I thought there was maybe it was me, but I was also reading vibes between Hadrian and Lucius. I was like,
totally. There's
a part where they like embrace, and I was like, what's going on here?
It's like, are we about to kiss? Like, oh my god, should we just go make out in the bath? What if we made out in the bath?
We do know that Hadrian likes himself some handsome guys. Apparently, Lucius, as we have learned from everyone else, is cut. So like.
So I don't know. I'm very curious as to Lucius's romantic and sexual life of what's going on there, but you might just have to wait for season 2. It is kind of funny how unsexual sometimes, although there is, considering how much nudity there is in the show, it seems very desexualized with some exceptions.
Okay, the other comment I have to say is like I was really impressed with like all of the creative ways they're covering it up, and then there was one episode I was like, oh, we just give up, just do the net like the blur.
Just have pixelation. It's fine.
Yeah.
Right, no koi fish in front, you know. Like,
yes, the koi fish was my favorite.
Yeah. It's like the scene in Austin Powers where he's running through and everything.
Yes, Colin. Oh my god.
Well, I mean, that speaks to this issue of like, you know, we didn't see a lot of violence and, you know, we didn't see a lot of sex.
And most nudity I've ever seen in a single show.
The chastity to nudity ratio was pretty wild.
Yeah. And that's kind of impressive, honestly. You know, it's kind of a breath of fresh air, maybe, you know?
Absolutely. Yeah, I would agree.
All right. Breath of fresh air.
We'll breath of fresh air.
All over the body. Chiara, thank you so much for joining us. We hope this was a great way to spend your Wednesday evenings.
Yeah, this is so fun. It's always so much better to like watch with some buddies, you know, like I'm super happy I was able to like talk through this experience with some people because
definitely,
you know, this isn't for everyone, but like, I think if it is for you, like you're going to love it.
Definitely.
Yeah. You know? So I'm so happy you guys were into it and enjoyed it as much as I did.
If listeners want to read or see or hear more from you, Chiara, where can they do that?
So you can always visit my website, which is animatedantiquity.com. I'm posting there, you know, regularly still. I'm still finding new amazing animation and still writing about it. Of course, you can send me a good old-fashioned email. You can find me at Vanderbilt University. I don't have anything big coming up, except I am working on an edited volume on animation in the ancient world with Toph Marshall from UBC. And so we are I'd say maybe like a third of the way through that process. I'd anticipate this book coming out 2025. Let's just cross our fingers and say 2025. So there will be, sadly, no talk of Thermae Romae in the book, but we do have one contributor who will be writing about Olympia Kuklos, which is another Mari Yamazaki manga that got turned into anime that's about the Olympics. And it's sort of another time travel story, but this time obviously like focused on Greece and then Tokyo and the Tokyo Olympics.
So cool.
And it's awesome and crazy also and wonderful. And the chapter of the book about it is going to be fantastic. So we will be kind of engaging with some of her other work. And so, yeah, that's kind of me at the moment. But I do, just encourage everyone to go watch more cartoons, take more baths, watch more cartoons.
Yes.
Do both, right? Watch cartoons in the bath. That's how I
do them together. Absolutely.
Don't drop your computer in the bath. It
was water dripping from the curtains. That's what did it. It was. I didn't drop it.
Yes,
I didn't
no electronics in the bath, please.
Yeah.
Everyone who's listening.
Yeah. So on that note, thank you everyone for listening. If you enjoy, please rate and review us on services like Apple Podcasts. That really helps us out a lot. You can find us both at our website at movieswedik.com as well as on Blue Sky at Dig Movies and Instagram. You can donate to us at Ko-fi. We'll be back soon as we return to our theme this season of Rome in television. So thank everybody for listening. Thank you, Chiara, again, and bye.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.